I have to admit, I had a lot of fun reading Boruto Two Blue Vortex chapter 16. It's not the best chapter by any means, not even close, it's not even that good, but my goodness that I find it hilarious at times. Before getting into the goofy stuff however, there's a couple serious topics to go over first. The chapter starts off with a flashback to Boruto's training with Kashi and Koji to master Flying Raijin, and thankfully they took the general approach I was hoping for, where Boruto's biggest roadblocks seem to be coming up with ideas and mentally figuring out how to do these jutsu, rather than anything physical, allowing Koji to help Boruto skip the majority of that time by simply telling him everything Boruto eventually figures out, but he still has to do the actual training to master these jutsu regardless. Boruto still improved at a ridiculous rate even with this caveat, but that's pretty normal for Boruto anyway. I do wish we actually got to see the before and after with Sasuke's training though, maybe we eventually will, but right now we don't know how much Boruto learned from Sasuke and how much he simply learned from himself via Koji. We can infer that Boruto is only able to get this strong because of the skill Sasuke hammered into him, but that's not as impactful as actually seeing those improvements and how Sasuke's training relates to his future training. But anyway, they go on to explain how Boruto derived an extremely similar jutsu to that of Flying Raijin, of which he gave the same name, seemingly based on his standard otsutsuki space-time jutsu that he could use with his karma seal, which is a theory a lot of us had, and I personally like the idea and hope we see more of this concept in the future. Now the phrasing is a little bit weird, but Koji's dialogue makes it seem as though the Otsutsuki's ability to fly and travel through space-time are ninjutsu, not shinjutsu, which doesn't make any sense given that Obito already explained that ninjutsu is an attempt to recreate phenomena similar to shinjutsu by weaving signs and concentrating one's chakra, where we have never seen an Otsutsuki or Karma user weave signs for their space-time jutsu, and more importantly, Otsutsuki's space-time jutsu is in many ways even more advanced than Kode's claw marks, which are shinjutsu, as Kode can only teleport to locations he has already been to before in order to place a claw mark there, whereas the Otsutsuki can go wherever they want whenever they want. And based on the artistic presentation of these panels, it looks as though Boruto has merely mastered the art of Otsutsuki space-time jutsu and applied it in a unique way, doing it really quickly and using ninja tools imbued with his chakra to sense where he should teleport in an extremely similar manner to that of Flying Raijin, hence the name copy. But with that in mind, it feels a little strange for Otsutsuki space-time jutsu to only be ninjutsu rather than shinjutsu, especially since it seemed like the whole point in chapter 75 was that Otsutsuki abilities are shinjutsu, whereas ninja abilities are ninjutsu. That being said, you can interpret this line as Koji simply explaining what space-time ninjutsu is broadly speaking, and then stating that it's one of the basic abilities Otsutsuki can use, but when the Otsutsuki use it, it's shinjutsu, whereas when ninja use it, it's ninjutsu. That's not directly what Koji says, and I'll admit it's the less likely interpretation of this line, but until they explain it more concretely, this would be the more consistent interpretation, so it's the one I'll go with for now. In any case, Koji explains all the roadblocks Boruto runs into and the solutions he comes up with, which was a cool sequence to work through and definitely had a more Naruto-like feel to it, where they work through the ins and outs of the jutsu, both its strengths and its weaknesses, and I thought the little drawings of each aspect was a nice touch. That being said, as cool as it is to see some of Boruto's training here, it's a little bit random for this particular chapter. I get that Koji talks about the future and the singularity of fate, which is why they chose to weave the Boruto training flashback into this scene, but none of Koji's talk is about Boruto's training, much less Flying Raijin specifically, so it might have made more sense to include this flashback at a time when Boruto's training or his jutsu became relevant again. Not that any of this is a big deal. Speaking of Koji's talk though, Koji proceeds to talk more about his ability and how knowing about the future can influence the future in unpredictable ways by creating new branches that he did not initially foresee. And by creating more branches, they create more possible outcomes, which makes predicting which track they're on increasingly difficult. For this reason, Koji is making a firm attempt to minimize how many people he shares his knowledge of the future with, so far limiting the spread to Boruto, Eida who is watching their conversation with her Senrigan, and ever so slightly Shikamaru by giving Shikamaru vague orders but without explaining the future side aspect. Koji knows he has to share information with some people, but he doesn't want that information to spread so far that his predictions of the future spiral out of control, which makes sense. I know it might seem weird that Koji doesn't want to warn people about the bad future to try to prevent it, but since it seems as though Koji can't see the branching futures that result from telling people about the future, or at least he hasn't seen them yet or can't see them until after he's already told them about it, I'm okay with them being cautious about it and concerned about the ramifications of his actions. That said, this is sort of a small rewrite, but I do think it would be a really good addition to the story if Koji gave an example of a time he told Boruto or someone else about the future, and how it led to some drastically different branching futures that he never would have predicted, so as to explain why he's so cautious about it now. It doesn't have to be too crazy of a ramification. For a ridiculous example, maybe telling Boruto about the future led to Inojin almost dying, whereas he was completely free from harm in Koji's previous visions. Stuff like that could go a long ways for adding weight to Koji's worries and prevent anyone from doubting Koji and thinking, "But that doesn't make any sense." Let me know what you think about that little rewrite idea in the comments. Moving on with the chapter though, I love the fact that Eida was not only watching, but Koji was anticipating it, and implies that Eida will become a singularity of fate alongside Boruto and Koji, which is something I'm looking forward to for Eida's character. On the flip side of things, I also really like the callback to when Mamushi could see or sense Eida when she watched them in the present with her senri gone, and I'll admit when I was reading the chapter I skipped ahead a page and saw that and got so excited thinking Mamushi was watching them at that specific moment, but ended up being a little disappointed when I realized it was just a reference to what he did in chapter 5. But even still, I like the fact that it scared Eida shitless, possibly for the first time in her life, and I hope they do a lot more with this concept in the future, rather than simply having Eida continuously avoid it by simply waiting a few minutes and watching the scenes of the past instead. Shout out to my boy Mamushi for always being a goat though. He never disappoints, even though he's hardly done anything. That's about all there is to say about that aspect of things for now, but the next segment of the chapter is where things get interesting, and this is going to be the last serious topic before we get into the silly stuff. Sarada and Sumire's argument. I actually like it for several reasons. Even if it's over-exaggerated, there is an element of truth to what Sumire is saying. Sarada may have the right intent in wanting to help Boruto, but she only does so from her perspective of help, without much regard for Boruto's perspective on the matter, and there's nothing wrong with that. This is the story establishing one of Sarada's character flaws, an essential story element that serves as the foundation for her growth. Sarada cannot progress as a character if she has nothing to progress in the first place, and I'm not sure if they will go this route, but it's possible that this character flaw somehow relates to Sarada's identity or lack thereof that was poorly presented in the previous arc by Sarada's lack of an answer to Hidari's question. I'll discuss why that was a missed opportunity another time, but assuming they intend to do anything with this concept, I think it would be interesting if this conversation with Sumire is building on this plot point as we follow Sarada's character journey, so it's something I plan to keep an eye on. Now I suspect that a lot of people didn't like this segment of the chapter very much, and part of that might be because of Sumire's over-dramatized reaction, but I also think a lot of people simply aren't interested in the love conversation at all. It was the same with Mitsuki and Eida's conversation in chapter 8, even though that's some of the most narratively rich material in Two Blue Vortex. This conversation between Sarada and Sumire is quite similar, as it helps to portray the characters' misguided perspectives before they eventually comprehend those flaws and accelerate their growth throughout the arc or future arcs, which is precisely what a story of this nature should do. This is not bad writing by any means, you just have to look at it from the right perspective. I feel like a lot of people have a misconception between what's hype and what's narratively good, because a lot of seemingly hype moments in Two Blue Vortex are often poorly executed, which I continuously call out, much to the fandom's dismay, while I'm able to dismantle the better written elements of what are often viewed as boring. Vortex is centered around the narrative execution of these chapters, so keep that in mind whenever you want to disagree with me. I also for well over a year now about why Sarada and Sumire are immune to Eida's love charm. Similar takeaway from this chapter as I did. Shout out Greffer if you're watching, and obviously this increased my interest in this conversation quite substantially. And after watching that video when it comes out later this month, hopefully you'll feel the same. With that being said though, let's make fun of the chapter now, starting with Sumire's completely unreasonable reaction here. Boruto is one of Sarada's closest friends from childhood and a member of Team 7, and she hasn't seen him in 3 years since he fled from the village. Romantic feelings aside, it's completely reasonable for Sarada to hug Boruto here, just like when Sakura hugged Naruto after the pain invasion. It's not like Hinata threw a fit about it. Moreover, nothing was stopping Sumire from walking up to Boruto and saying, "I'm so glad you're safe, Boruto-kun," as she goes in for a hug herself. I doubt Boruto would have been like, "Ugh, gross, get away from me, Sumire." And if he did, well, I guess you got your answer on the dating question. Clearly, he's not interested. I like the point Sumire is getting at, and I'm not saying this is bad, especially since she did reflect back and realize she might have overreacted a bit there, and there might be even more to it than that if my analysis is correct. I'm just pointing out how overdramatic and unreasonable she was being because I found it rather silly. This next one is my personal favorite, the Jura bookstore nonsense. This was too funny, especially considering how it played out during my live reaction on the podcast. Koji warned Shikamaru not to let Himawari leave the village, or else Jura may go after her, and my initial thought was, huh? What do you mean, if she goes outside the village? Did you forget that Jura invaded the village looking for Naruto and eventually Himawari? For what reason can he not do this again? And to my surprise, they actually addressed my concern in the most ridiculous way possible by saying that Jura considers Konoha's culture to be something of high value, and that he's reluctant to battle inside the village. Unfortunately, that last part isn't exactly the most true statement of all time. Maybe he'd rather fight somewhere else, but Jura had no problem sprouting trees out of buildings to kill the gatekeepers, smashing Kawaki into a water tank, catching Himawari inside a tree in the middle of the village, and shooting Biju bombs all over the place. The only place Jura was concerned about was the bookstore when Kawaki showed up, and I was ecstatic when Koji said, if Jura were to visit a bookstore, they should treat him as if he was their #1 customer. Damn right they should. They'll never get a dedicated customer like Jura ever again. And given that they actually included the bookstore example, I honestly think they should have taken this a step further. Rather than saying, keep Himawari inside the village at all times, Koji should have said, keep Himawari near the bookstore at all times. This adds to the absurdity of Koji's command, while also remaining true to Jura's character. It's really not much different from the room-sharing mission and concept, and if Himawari's not going to be important in this arc anyway, why not let her eat pancakes at the bookstore with Team Shikacho? Next up is probably the dumbest thing ever, but I found it too funny not to mention. Konohamaru tells Sarada, don't space out like that. The sand should make you laugh at you. This is the most ridiculous thing to imagine, and at this point, I wish they actually had Yoda or Haraya laughing at Sarada. That would have been funny. Lastly, I have 2 other dumb things that got me cracking up. The first is just the toad sprawled out instead of poofing away like Koji's other toads. It almost looks like it's pretending to be dead, and I love it, even though it's probably dead for real, sadly. The next one is Ryu and Matsuri staring at that toad forever before saying anything. Konohamaru notices the Shinju, who are just standing still. Let me get a zoomed out shot of the Shinju standing still. Let me zoom in onto them still just standing there. Then Ryu finally asks what they're looking at. Then Konohamaru tells everyone that there's 2 Shinju there. And then Matsuri finally says, a clue. It leads to Boruto. It just feels like they were just standing there silently for minutes before saying anything about the toad. I know that's probably not what actually happened, but it's funnier to imagine it this way. I felt like I was reading a Boruto abridged chapter this month. There was just something about it that had me cracking up a lot if you can't tell by now. For 2 more side notes that I want to mention, I'm very glad that Mitsuki is on this mission. I really hope he finally gets some actual shine for once, and I really want to see him fight Ryu with his Sage power, essentially giving us the fight we never got in the anime. We'll see if I get my wish or not though. I also wish Damon was listening to Koji's conversation about Jura. I want to know what he thinks about Jura's power and whether or not he'd be interested in fighting him. I expect he'll fight Mamushi or Jura at some point, but it's almost hard to get my hopes up when the only thing he's ever done in Two Blue Vortex is tease Kawaki with the village finding out about the truth about Naruto, only for it to not happen the way Damon foreshadowed. We gotta do something with the character at some point. And with that, that's about everything I have to say about this chapter. At first I didn't think I had much to say this month, but it looks like I had plenty to dive into. But let me know what you think. Did you like this chapter? Did you hate it? Was it just okay? Did you find any of the scenes funny at least? What did you think of the Sarada and Sumire conversation? And what are you expecting from Mitsuki and the others on this Sand Village mission? Let me know in the comments below. Watch this video here for more of my content, subscribe and like the video to help me against the YouTube algorithm, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.